The mountains do not have a voice, but they have a way of making you listen. In the heart of Montana, there is a range they call the Crazies. It is a jagged, violent piece of geography that rises out of the earth like a row of broken teeth. People go in there to find themselves or to find elk. But sometimes the mountains decide they want to keep what is walking on them. I have been looking into these files for a long time. Long enough to know that when the air gets thin and the granite starts to glow under a bruised sky, logic begins to fail. September 7th, 2014. A man named Aaron Hedges set out with his friends for what should have been a standard hunting trip. Aaron was 38 years old. He was not a novice. He was a man who understood the weight of a rifle and the way the wind shifts before a storm. He had the gear, the experience, and a map that should have brought him home. But the Crazies are not interested in your maps. They were headed for Sunlight Lake. It is a high, lonely place, somewhere along the trail. Aaron got separated. It happens fast. 1 minute you are looking at the back of your friend's pack. The next, the trees have shifted, and the silence is so heavy it feels like it is pressing against your eardrums. He told his companions he would catch up, that he was going to take a different route to the camp. That was the last time a living soul saw Aaron Hedges in the light of day. The weather in Montana is a predator of its own. Within 24 hours, the temperature plummeted. A summer scouting trip turned into a winter survival nightmare. Snow began to fall in thick, wet sheets that blinded the search parties. They looked for him. God knows they looked. Dogs, helicopters, men on horseback pushing through the brush until their lungs burned. They found nothing. No fire. No blood. No footprints in the mud. It was as if Aaron had simply evaporated into the grey mist. But the wilderness has a strange way of spitting things back out. 1 year later, miles away from where Aaron was last seen, a searcher found something. It was a pair of boots. They were tucked neatly under a tree on a high ridge. Miles across, difficult, vertical terrain from his last known position. Think about that. You are in a life or death struggle in a mountain blizzard, and you take off your boots. You leave them behind and keep walking into the frozen dark. It defies every human instinct for survival. A few days after the boots were found, they discovered his backpack and his hydration bladder. They were located in an area that had been searched multiple times before. This is a pattern we see far too often. Items appearing in places where people have already looked, almost as if they were placed there after the fact. The backpack was empty of the essentials. No rifle. No heavy coat. Just the shell of a man's journey left behind like a discarded skin. The investigation took another dark turn when they found his remains. It was 2015. Nearly a full year after he vanished. His bones were discovered on a private ranch. Aisles in the opposite direction of his intended camp. He was found on a steep, rocky slope that would be difficult for a healthy man to climb in broad daylight, let alone a man who was allegedly lost and freezing. The boots were miles away. The pack was miles away. And here was Aaron, or what was left of him, resting in the dirt. When the coroners looked at the remains, they found more questions than answers. There were no signs of animal predation on the bones that made sense for the timeline. There were no bullet holes. No broken limbs that would suggest a fall. Just a man who had wandered in a massive, illogical circle through some of the most unforgiving terrain in the lower 48 states. Why did he climb that final ridge? Why was he missing his footwear in a sub-zero environment? There is a coldness that settles in your stomach when you look at the map of his final movements. If you trace the line from where he disappeared to where his boots were found, and then to where his body lay, it makes no sense. He crossed ridges that should have been impassable. He moved through territory that even seasoned hunters avoid. It is as if he was being driven by something. Or perhaps, something was leading him. We see this in the files over and over again. The profile points are all there. High altitude. A sudden and violent change in weather. Proximity to granite and water. The removal of clothing in freezing temperatures, which some call paradoxical undressing. But that does not explain how a man travels miles over jagged rock without the soles of his feet being shredded to ribbons. And then there is the placement of the items, neatly tucked away, as if someone was tidying up a crime scene that had no witness. I have spent nights staring at the photos of those mountains. They look beautiful from a distance, but up close, they are a labyrinth of shadows. Aaron Hedges was a husband, a father, a man who knew the woods, and yet, the woods took him. They broke him down into pieces and scattered those pieces across the peaks like an offering. The official reports will tell you it was exposure. They will tell you he got disoriented. They will give you clinical terms to make you feel safe when you go hiking next weekend. But the reports cannot explain the silence. They cannot explain the way the dogs lose the scent as soon as they hit the granite. They cannot explain why a man would leave his boots behind when the snow is waist deep. There is a presence in the high country that does not follow our laws of physics or psychology. It is old. It is patient. And it is still there, waiting for the next person to take the wrong turn at the edge of the trees. Aaron Hedges is just one name in a ledger that is growing longer every year. From the Crazies to the Cascades. From the Smokies to the Sierra Nevadas. The pattern remains. People vanish into the thin air. And if they come back at all, they come back in a way that leaves the living wishing they had never been found. The mountains do not have a voice, but if you listen close enough to the wind howling through those Montana peaks, you might hear the sound of someone calling out. And by then, it is already too late. The mystery of Aaron Hedges does not end with the discovery of a body. It begins there, because every piece of evidence found in those mountains serves only to scream that something is wrong with the world as we understand it. In the late summer of 2014, Aaron was a man in his prime, an experienced hunter who had trekked through the backcountry of Montana more times than most people have walked their own neighborhood. He was equipped with top-tier gear, a radio, and the kind of survival instinct that is forged in the high altitude of the American West. And yet, when the searchers finally began to piece together his final days, they found a trail that defied the laws of biology and physics alike. The first anomaly was found by a rancher miles away from where Aaron was last seen. It was his boots. They were sitting there at the base of a ridge, not tossed aside in a panic, not lost in a tumble down a ravine, but placed. They were neatly lined up, as if he had just stepped out of them to walk into his own living room. To find a pair of boots in the wilderness is one thing, but to find them in that condition, miles from where the man disappeared, suggests a level of deliberation that sends a cold shiver down the spine of anyone who knows what it means to be without footwear in that terrain. If you have never stood in the crazy mountains, you cannot understand the cruelty of the ground there. It is a kingdom of granite, of sharp, broken scree that acts like 1,000 tiny razors waiting to flay the skin from anything that touches it. Aaron Hedges reportedly traveled miles from those boots to the location where his remains were eventually discovered. He crossed high ridges. He navigated through thickets of mountain mahogany and over jagged rock fields. And he did it in his socks. When the investigators looked at those socks, they expected to see them shredded to nothing. They expected to see blood and bone, and the evidence of a man driven to agony by the earth itself. But that is not what they found. The socks were intact. They showed wear, but they did not show the catastrophic damage that should come from miles of barefoot hiking over Montana stone. It is as if he was walking on air, or perhaps as if the ground itself had softened for him. Then there is the matter of the gear. Searchers found his backpack and his water bottles in a different location altogether. Again, the items were not scattered. They were tucked away neatly under a tree. This is a recurring theme in the missing 411 files. The neatness of the scene. In a typical survival situation, a person becomes frantic. They drop things as they run. They lose items in the brush. But with Aaron, and so many others, it looks like someone was tidying up. It looks like a stage was being set. The water bottles were full. The gear was functional. There was no reason for him to leave his life support behind, unless he no longer believed he needed it, or unless something else had decided he was finished with it. The weather during the search was a violent character in its own right. A storm rolled in that brought feet of snow and temperatures that plummeted well below the freezing mark. This is another profile point we see across the board. A person goes missing and the heavens open up. The wind howls at 40 miles per hour, and the snow erases any tracks that might have been left behind. It is almost as if the environment is conspiring to protect the secret of what happened. By the time the search teams could get back into the high country, the scent was gone. The dogs, those incredible animals that can track a scent through almost anything. They hit the granite and they stopped. They did not just lose the trail. They acted as if the trail had never existed. Some of the handlers reported that their dogs seemed uneasy, even fearful, staring into the tree line at things the human eye could not perceive. When you look at the map of his movements, it forms a jagged zigzag across the peaks. He was moving in directions that made no sense for someone trying to get back to camp or to a road. He was climbing when he should have been descending. He was pushing deeper into the heart of the wilderness when safety was in the opposite direction. We talk about paradoxical undressing in cases of hypothermia. The idea that the brain misfires and tells the victim they are burning up when they are actually freezing, leading them to strip off their clothes. But paradoxical undressing does not explain how a man can navigate miles of impassable terrain with the precision of a mountain goat while his brain is supposedly shutting down. It does not explain how he could cross ridges that seasoned mountaineers avoid during the day, let alone in the middle of a blizzard. The body of Aaron Hedges was finally found in a place that had been searched before. This is another point that keeps investigators up at night. People appearing in areas that were previously cleared. He was found near a cache of his own items, but he was miles from where he should have been. The condition of the remains after the elements and the scavengers had their way was grim. But the mystery remained etched into the very position of his bones. He had laid down in the shadow of the peaks, in a spot that felt calculated, almost ritualistic. There is a silence that exists in the high country of Montana. It is not the silence of peace. It is the silence of a predator that is holding its breath. The crazy mountains were named by the indigenous people for a reason. They knew that the thin air at those altitudes does something to the mind. Or perhaps, they knew that there are things living in the rocks that have been there since the world was cold and dark. Aaron Hedges was a strong man, a capable man, and the mountains took him apart piece by piece. We see this same pattern in the case of Jared Atadero in Colorado, and in the strange disappearance of Keith Parkins in Oregon. The proximity to granite, the sudden weather events, the impossible distances traveled by someone who should be incapacitated, the items found in pristine condition while the person vanishes. It is a ledger written in shadow, and we are no closer to understanding the author than we were 40 years ago. As you sit in your home tonight, safe behind locked doors and double-paned glass, remember that the map is not the territory. There are places on this earth where our rules do not apply, where the wind can call your name in the voice of a loved one, and where the granite under your feet is listening to every step you take. Aaron Hedges went into the woods looking for an elk, but something else was looking for him. And until we acknowledge that there is a presence in the wilderness that we cannot quantify, the ledger will only continue to grow. The mountains are beautiful, yes, but they are also hungry, and they are very, very patient.